Hi, I'm Astrid. Welcome to Bark and Bite. This is going to be a one-stop tour of anger and aggression in roller derby through the lens of psychology. I'm going to be your host for the next hour, so buckle up. We've got some learning to do. I'd encourage you strongly, if you've got comments or questions, please do type in the box. I'll come to them as and when I can answer them. I will also leave some time at the end for some questions as well. So if you think of anything along the way, I'll make sure I'll go through all those questions at the end and get everything answered. So I should probably start by telling you a little bit about myself, your host. Who am I, and why am I talking at you right now? Well, I'm two people, really. By day, I'm Dr. Astrid Coxon, PhD, C-Psychol. I'm a perpetual student with as many letters after my name at this point as in it. I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, a master's degree in psychology, and one in health psychology. And most recently, I have a PhD from the Norwich Medical School. I'm a chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society, so you can be reasonably well assured that there's some legitimate science behind all of my rambling. I teach psychology undergraduates at the University of East Anglia, and I'm also an online teaching fellow for Masters in Psychology and Neuroscience of Mental Health at King's College in London. I've recently landed another job at King's as well as a research associate on an online mindfulness project in collaboration with Monash University in Melbourne. But that's not all, because at night I am *8, a blocker at Suffolk Roller Derby here in the UK. Although I'm off skates at the moment, as I'm waiting for an MRI for a suspected rotator cuff tendon tear. Boom. There's still plenty of me to do off skates though, as following our recent AGM, I am once again president of our league at Suffolk Roller Derby, and I also co-host a roller derby podcast called Mind, Body and Roll, where my medical doctor friend and teammate Spanky and I talk about the brains and bodies of roller derby athletes. I also like weightlifting, pizza, and dogs, as you can tell by the title of this presentation. So, just a quick talk through an overview of what I'm going to cover this evening. Um, I'm going to be talking about anger specifically in roller derby, a quick explanation of what is anger, some of the psychological and physiological symptoms of anger. Talk about some of the things that make us angry, specifically in roller derby. What's the fallout from anger? What effects does it have? And what could we potentially do about it? But enough about me. How about a little bit about you? Let me know a couple of things real quick in the comments box. There, there. Um, who are you? Why are you interested in anger specifically? Are you an angry person? What kind of things make you angry? If you're a roller derby skater, not just a coach as well, have you been angry on track? Do you have any embarrassing memories of losing your rag on track? I certainly do, and I'm going to be sharing some of those experiences throughout the presentation, and I can feel myself blushing as I say that, because anger and the fallout of anger is not something I'm proud of, but I think it's really important that we own up to those experiences and kind of accept them as something we've done so that we can actually address them and move on from that and move on in a concerted way as well. So I've got my first. Ah, from Melbourne. Hello. I might be visiting Melbourne next year because of this research opportunity. So you also have rotator cuff injuries. Interested in how individual anger impacts the team. That is something I'm specifically going to cover, and I'm going to use a really fun metaphor. So I will. I would love to come and visit Northside Rollers. I might have to check in some extra baggage on the plane in that case, but that's fine. That would be amazing. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about how anger impacts the rest of the team, the social effects of anger, because it's not just you that gets angry and suffers the consequences of anger. It's the people around you as well. So also, hello, Stay Puft, 7-year announcer, brand new roller derby coach. I myself am not a coach. I work as a president of the league, and I work with our training committee. Um, but I'm always really interested in what coaches' experiences are, and if there are things that I can kind of consult on in terms of managing behaviours and things like that. So I'm really pleased to have this opportunity. Angering clients. In clients, what? Oh, business coach. Ah, yes, yeah. I'm sure there are many kind of parallels in this as well. A lot of my research has been doing with organisational change, so I'm very interested to share some parallels there as well. What else have we got? Get angry when I return to the bench coming from track and do not agree. Yes, do not agree with other people's decisions. That's another massive trigger point that we're going to talk about as well, because other people's decisions are outside of our control, and that can be really anger-inducing because you feel disempowered. Deal with anger as a coach of my team. Some people get so frustrated during practice, freak out, and just leave. Yeah, that's really difficult and quite common as well. Adult league training camp coach, junior league. Oh, I have no experience of junior leagues. I think our league is just starting to set up a junior element. I'm really excited about that, but that's something we're going to be watching very carefully. See, anger in skating, sometimes in the kids. I think kids' anger issues are slightly different, and that's definitely something I want to explore more in depth as we get our junior league off the ground. Oh, another shoulder injury. I'm so sorry to hear that. I'll look at one more and then I'll crack on with the next slide. Skating coach in Crime City. Malmo is somewhere I'd like to visit as well. I'd like to go travelling all over the place and see all the beautiful countryside as well. When teammates don't listen to me or when refs are being mean, I get a lot of that. Why are the refs doing this to me? And it's hard to not take personally, isn't it? And the right amount of anger and aggression. Yeah, that's definitely something we're going to cover. I am going to move on now. I'm very conscious of the fact that I could sit here reading your comments all day and we could discuss them in depth. Maybe that's something we could follow up at the end or in the chat on the Facebook group at some point. But thank you very much for sharing. So anger in sport is sadly too common, and I think that's demonstrated by kind of the stream of comments I've had on the side there. Competitive sports like roller derby are by their nature highly charged. If you're invested in winning something, whether you're a player or a spectator, or a coach or a bench team of any sort, emotions run high, and sometimes fraught emotions can impair our judgment and pull our focus and make us do things that we might later regret. Like I said, I will give some personal examples later. I'm quite anxious about sharing those because, yeah, it doesn't paint me in a particularly nice light. But I like to think I've moved on from there and I've learned a lot about myself and how to manage my anger. There are a number of myths surrounding anger in sport, such as sport being a good outlet for anger and aggression. Whilst there's a huge body of evidence behind engaging in sports and exercise, releasing endorphins, and it's excellent for promoting both physical and emotional well-being, the picture for sport as a way of specifically managing anger is less clear. So using sport simply as a means to kind of express anger with some conscious active mental work is a bit ineffective and uncathartic. Sorry, without some conscious active mental work is ineffective and uncathartic. If you start adopting this mindset of I've got to go and play sport because I've got anger, there's this kind of implicit association. A sport is where I go and be angry, and it starts becoming this place where you go to be angry rather than deal with the angry feelings that you're feeling at all times. So playing the sport might tire you out, but you're likely to feel just as angry, if not angrier, than before the sport. And a lot of this is tied in with the physiological basis of anger. So anger is a form of stress response, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the traditional fight or flight response. And I know this has been talked a lot in media about anxiety and how we've kind of over time evolved to have this fight or flight response, and it's become maladaptive. It's no longer useful. You know, we don't need to run away from mastodons anymore. So it's not as useful a stress response as it used to be, but it's the same with anger. So when we get angry, there's a release of adrenaline and noradrenaline. Our heart rate rises, our blood pressure rises, and our attention becomes narrowed. We're focused on the threat. Something has caused us to be angry, and we've become focused on that. It was useful once upon a time if we needed to respond to someone who was being threatening to us. We become angry, and you become more energetic and more able to fight against the thing that's making you angry. But in sport, we're not fighting against something that we're being angry at. It's not an immediate threat as such, and it might help you to deal with the person who made you angry, but it can have a lot of unintended consequences as well. Anger is often described as being an energy. I know I gave the picture of John Lydon in the previous slide, of Johnny Rotten from Public Image Limited and the Sex Pistols. Oh my God, that's completely gone out of my head. He is in the Sex Pistols, isn't he? Johnny Rotten. He described anger as an energy, and his autobiography is called Anger as an Energy. And I've often heard people say that anger gives them energy in gameplay, and that they can channel that anger and energy to play better. And this is a very common belief across a broad range of sports. And all too often, anger is seen as an intrinsic part of competitive sport, and it's often encouraged and even elicited as a way to improve athletic performance. But as you might expect, it's not really that clear cut. There's a study by Ruiz and Hanin in the Journal of Psychology of Sport and Exercise from 2011, and I will provide a link at the end of the slides, and I'll get Maya to post those up as well. They looked at the anger in karate athletes, experienced karate athletes, and the study produced really mixed results. Most of the participants saw anger as a useful energy. They perceived it as something that did fire them up and make their performance stronger. But picking it apart, there was this combination of what was useful anger and what was debilitating anger, had debilitating effects. And most notably, one of the debilitating effects is that whilst anger might give someone more energy, it's rarely channeled in a productive direction. We focus our anger on the perceived object of upset. So, if someone hit you illegally, you might be focused on getting a revenge hit in. And we lose sight of our actual goal, and we do stupid stuff. We show up our teammates and coaches, and in some extreme examples, people can get seriously hurt. I just want to check in now. I wanted to play a video for you, but we were having some tech issues earlier. There's a YouTube video, just a compilation of some angry sports people. I'll get. I'm just going to check messages here. They've loaded. It's not globally available, which is a shame. I will share it on the Facebook group later, so those of you who are in the UK and possibly some other countries might be able to view it. It was just to give you a kind of context about even professional athletes lose their rag. And I'm sure you have seen videos of tennis players are quite a common example, smashing their bats up against the sidelines. In this particular compilation, someone kicks an umpire in the leg. He's not the object of upset, but he's gotten injured as a result of uncontrolled anger. And ice hockey athletes beating each other up. It's not pretty watching. It made me very uncomfortable to watch, and it just highlighted to me how it can have really detrimental effects to the image of the sport. And I know there have been some fights in roller derby as well, and I've seen people expelled from games from throwing punches. So we don't want to see that in our athletes, and we want to know ways that we can get on top of it. I used to be one of those people. Well, maybe not as bad as the kicking umpires and the leg example, but I've certainly reacted in ways that I'm not proud of. I genuinely thought that my anger was something that made me better at roller derby when I first started. But there's definitely a big distinction between blind anger and the type of controlled aggression that we see in most contact sports. Aggression is more about the confidence to take controlled, decisive action, to hit hard, to push your limits. Conversely, anger is a very reactive emotion, and it's traditionally uncontrolled. Here's me looking angry. I don't usually consider myself a particularly angry person. I like to think of myself as quite a chill person. But to be honest, before I started roller derby about 4 years ago, I hadn't really been prepared for the intensity of a competitive contact sport environment. I know it's said in my blurb in the lobby that I'm more at home behind a computer than I am on a treadmill. I'm not a sporty person, and I think that's true of quite a lot of the lower level roller derby players. For us, it's a sport for people who didn't like sport at school. That was definitely true of me. So I don't think I'd ever learnt the skills of dealing with that high emotional intensity environment in a competitive sport. When I first started playing with my team at champs level, I discovered some very uncomfortable truths about myself. And one of those was that I sometimes lost my temper and I didn't know how to manage it. I completely blew my top in one game last year. I embarrassed my teammates. I played terribly. And once I did come back to down to earth, once I'd gotten over the fact that someone had hit me unexpectedly, it was just being hit repeatedly unexpectedly because I was an inexperienced player and I didn't like it. Once I did come back down to earth, I feigned an injury so that I could just lie on the floor face down and not have to look anyone in the face because I was so ashamed of how I had behaved. And that incident was a very big wake-up call for me, especially when I went to review the game footage later and regretted not managing myself better. I'd like to think that the majority of skaters that we're working with would like to improve, but I think sometimes we focus so much on the physical skills in roller derby that the way that we behave often gets forgotten. The first step in this, I think, is being aware of what triggers your anger. For me, I realised it was three main things. I reviewed the way that I was behaving in games, and I worked out what were the things that pissed me off. And I think some of the comments that you guys made earlier, I think you'll be able to relate to some of these. So the first one was when I thought referees made an incorrect penalty call on me. So um, another example, I was playing in Iceland last year, and I was blocking someone had my arms out here, and the incoming jammer was pushing against my upper arm, and I got a forearms penalty. And I felt very righteous shouting at the ref and going, "This is a forearm, this is a..." Of course, got an insubordination penalty and had to sit a minute in the box for both my forearms penalty. You see, I'm still pissed off about this, about my forearms penalty and my insubordination. I should have just kept my mouth shut and taken it up with my coach, but no, I mouthed off, and I didn't like the ref for the rest of the game. There's nothing I can do about it. It's that there's nothing I could do about it, but I tried to, and it bit me in the ass. The second thing that was a trigger for me was when I thought opponents made a dirty hit on me. So when I got blocked in the back and they didn't get called for it, that made me angry as well. Again, nothing I can do about it. So anger served nothing apart from to draw my focus away from what I should have been doing. And the third one was just generally seeing penalties happen that didn't get called when I thought they should. And why am I concentrating on other people who should or shouldn't get penalties? Surely I should be blocking. In every instance, my anger was directed outwards. My anger was driven by what's called in psychology a perceived external locus of control. I got angry because something happened and I felt it wasn't my fault, it was out of my control, and I felt it was wrong, but I still felt there was nothing I could do about it but shout. This sort of anger is known in the literature as anger out, where you're directing anger out towards other people. So people got shouted at by me. I tried to make revenge hits on people. I shouted at refs. I flailed my arms around. The opposite of this is anger in. I'm not so guilty of this, but I have seen it in other people where they get angry and then they suppress it and criticize themselves and manifest this kind of negative self-talk about I'm useless and this happened. I'm so angry at myself. This happened because I made a mistake. But even though I thought there was nothing I could do about it, I did do something about it. Like I say, I shouted at the refs, I shouted at my opposition, I shouted at my bench coach at the time, I shouted at my teammates about how unfair it all was. I personally think that roller derby has the potential to bring out the absolute best, but also the absolute worst in people. That's certainly true of me. I think it's starting to bring the best out in me now, but certainly when I was starting out roller derby, I saw parts of myself that I didn't like. But some self-awareness and a willingness for self-reflection and personal growth has seen some improvement. And how do we encourage this in other people? That's the age-old question. So I was grumpy and shouty. So what? Surely if there's some sort of injustice, someone should say something, right? Only there's two major points to consider. Firstly, I was so caught up in this perceived injustice that I forgot that it was just that. It was a perceived injustice. It was my perception. It was how I framed the thing. I thought something was wrong and something needed to be done about it. From the centre of gameplay, it's really difficult for skaters to get an objective perspective of what everyone else is doing. And our focus is at times very narrow to the events in our immediate vicinity. And this comes back down again to the physiological response to stress. So when, like I said in the earlier slide, when you are stressed, when you have adrenaline coursing through your body, your focus narrows on the task at hand. And you can't see necessarily the whole picture of everything that's going on. So think of times when your skaters are chasing down jammers only to have a ref call out of play, and they take a look back and they realise they're 50 foot away from the rest of their team, and they didn't realise that they were that far right around the track. The refs are not involved in gameplay in the same way that skaters are. They're off the track looking in. They don't have the same high adrenaline that skaters have at the time. and they should have good cause to make calls. I'll admit they're not always right, but that is the nature of the game. They are human and sometimes they make mistakes. We all make mistakes. They will not catch every single penalty, and sometimes they make mistakes. They are human. Reffing is a seriously difficult business, and if a skater doesn't believe you, then make them ref at scrim and see how they enjoy it. It might open their eyes a bit. But I said there were two considerations to make about a perceived injustice when I was shouty and grumpy. And the second consideration is about the outward impacts of anger. And this is something that was mentioned earlier in the chat. What are the effects of anger on other people? All the time that you're acting as a self-appointed warrior of roller derby justice, that is what you're focused on. You are focused on shouting at the ref because they called something wrong, or trying to get a revenge hit on someone who did a dirty hit on you. Let's take the example of when an opponent doesn't get called for a penalty, but you think they should have. You're going to be ranting to your teammates when you should be focusing on playing the game, about blocking your jammers or jamming if you're a jammer. You might be ranting to your bench coach when actually they've got a really important job to do. And when you're on track, you're going to be focusing your energy on that skater you feel wasn't called for that penalty. In my case, yep, trying to get that revenge hit in. Not proud of it. Or gesturing indignantly to refs when I see them conduct what I think is a penalty that should be called. You know, I tried to find some footage earlier. Like I have a picture in my mind of me going like this. You know, it was a clockwise block. Direction. Well, it's directional, isn't it? Gesturing wildly at refs. What should I have been doing at the time? Focusing on playing roller derby to the best of my abilities. And that comes back to the example of that the serious meltdown I had at the beginning of last Champs season. I played an awful game because I was so busy going, he did that, she did that, I got hit wrong, my anger got control of me. And that's how we often talk about anger. It's something that takes control. We blow a fuse, we're out of control, we've lost our temper. It's not something that we control, it's a reactive thing. The less obvious impacts of anger include the impact that you have on your teammates. Anger is a very negative energy, and I'm going to now give you a very clumsy analogy to try and explain what I mean by this and why it's so important. So here are my dogs. This is Flossie and Jessie. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but Flossie is the white one and Jessie is the brown one, and they are whippets. They are lean, mean, running machines. They would be perfect at roller derby because they're very fast and manoeuvrable, and very strategic. They work in a pair. They're very clever, they're loyal, and incredibly cute, but they can't play nicely with others. They are very reactive dogs. They don't like other dogs. Except in certain circumstances, and we worked this out, that Jessie, the brown one, is not the first one to go after other dogs. It's always Flossie that instigates it, and Jessie picks up on it and goes, oh, she's doing something, I should do what she's doing. I don't think she even thinks about it, I think she just does. And I think you see this sometimes in roller derby. not quite. It's a very clumsy analogy. Stick with it. Because when you are angry and you are shouting at your teammates, they pick up on it and they sometimes also become incensed. Some of your teammates might get shaken up by your anger, and it will distract them in a variety of ways when they, like you, should be focusing on the game. They might have been playing quite nicely. Jessie gets on with other dogs fine on her own, but introduce this element of kind of reactiveness, and she changes. You know, she kind of sees that something's not right. You know, my friend is reacting. Maybe there is a threat here, and I should react to it as well. We discovered you take Flossie out of the equation. Jessie's perfectly nice to other dogs. You pick up Flossie, and Jessie can go up and say hello to other dogs and be lovely. And Flossie's not the one who bites other dogs on the bum. Not seriously, I might add. She kind of nips at her ankle. Flossie instigates it, and then Jessie takes over. She's the bark, and she's the bite. But you remove this kind of problem element, and she behaves. Enough about dogs. Everyone will notice when you're angry. Your teammates will notice, your coach will notice, but it's their responsibility up to a limited point. It's everyone's responsibility to kind of manage anger, but at the heart of it, it's the skater who's getting angry who needs to kind of address that head on. Officials will also notice if you become angry, by the way. If you become verbally aggressive, well, wouldn't say I was verbally aggressive, I was shouty. Is that verbally aggressive? Oh God, it's so embarrassing to admit this. If you become verbally aggressive to a referee or an official because of some perceived slight, you will find yourself with an insubordination penalty, and refs suddenly become hypervigilant. You are a volatile skater, and they will keep a close eye on you because you're visibly angry. I'm going to mention that. You're preempting me. I like this. An angry teammate makes the game a little less enjoyable for everyone involved. No, it's fine. It's fine. It's great. It means we're all on the same page, so it's fine. I'm going to talk about taking advantage in fact, the next slide. Um, the second major impact of being angered, and I have mentioned this earlier, this physiological response of narrowing focus, is that we perceive anger as kind of improving. Well, I say we. A lot of literature, a lot of lay literature, so non-scientific literature, perceives anger as being energizing, and this is commonly exhibited by sports people. That anger vitalizes me, and something you get some bench coaches in like American football who try to get their players riled up because they're more energetic then and they hit harder. The first obvious impact of my personal experience of uncontrolled anger was that it drew my focus. It definitely meant I played a lot worse than I was capable of, and the research stacks up. From a physiological perspective, the stress response of anger narrows our focus to the perceived object of anger. Anger is also demonstrably linked to poor performance in contact sports. If your attention is on the thing that you're angry about, you're not giving full attention to everything else going on around you, which in turn means you might not block or jam as well as usual. That jammer might nip by you when you're shouting at a ref and a jammer just nips straight by you. You could have blocked them if you were paying attention. You might hit in a more uncontrolled way. If you're angry, you're not as controlled. You're going in with a heavy hit rather than a smooth controlled hit, and you may well end up with another penalty. And guess what? That'll probably make you more angry. And here comes the footnote. One interesting aside about knowing when people are angry and being uncontrolled is I quite like it when opposition skaters are visibly losing their tempers for exactly the reason that I just said. An angry skater is usually a sloppy skater. I'm not saying deliberately rile up your opposition, but if your opponents aren't being disciplined in controlling or managing their anger, then there is something that you can capitalize in a variety of ways. Just remember to play legally and don't be a bad sports person. So when we become angry, what happens next? How are you and your skaters currently managing anger on the track and off it? I'm guessing that you're all here because you can bring to mind some incidences of anger or angry skaters that you're not sure how to address. If you can, think about some of the strategies you've tried to use to address them in the past. Did they work? Didn't they? I don't know if anyone has any ideas or suggestions of things that you have tried in the past, maybe on the bench on game day or at training with people that get worked up. I'm opening up to the floor here. Does anyone have any suggestions of things they've tried in the past, or are you just drawing a blank? I'm very conscious that I've just kind of rambled straight for half an hour. We've got some typing, so I'll pause for a second. You take people out of the environment, yeah. Okay. Yep. Breathing exercises, logic, breathing visualization. Yeah, I'm so glad that breathing is being suggested by more than one person. Visualization techniques, different. What sort of visualization techniques? We take people off track as well. Yep. Is that when they're very really in the midst of being completely riled up and just won't kind of listen to reason? The safest thing is to take them off track. I'm guessing. Considering a more peaceful environment, so kind of imagining a more peaceful environment. put it in their pocket. I like that. Like a beach or a garden, yeah. A beach would be when you put, yeah. That's one of the problems. Yeah, it's so difficult to address because if you start talking about the anger in the midst of it, yeah, it's why that's the worst thing you say to someone who's angry is like, calm down. You know, you're really angry. Calm down. It's yeah, that pisses me off further. Rosie was talking about having a fuck it bucket where people offload and leave it behind. Yeah, yeah, pin it. Let's put a pin in that. I think it's a commonly heard term when yeah, me too. Hate to be told to calm down. Yeah, it's infuriating, isn't it? Because like, well, if I could, then I would, wouldn't I? I wouldn't be angry. Uh, okay, thank you very much all for sharing those. And yeah, like I said, I'm glad to hear breathing come up because that's something that I think is really important. A really important suggestion. Managing any challenging behavior is inherently challenging. So anger being so highly charged and reactive to a particular point in time is particularly difficult to manage. And you guys have suggested a couple of reasons why that is, like drawing attention to it. It just makes people more angry. It makes me more angry. I know I'm angry. Why are you talking to me about it? Let me just be angry for a while. And sometimes you do just need to be angry for a while, but not on track. And so the first response is a very sensible one. And it's a difficult decision to make, but taking people out of that angry environment, the thing that is making them angry, can sometimes be the first and most sensible decision to make, especially if they're acting dangerously or being violent towards people. You have to consider other people's safety. Um, in the heat of the moment, there are no quick fixes apart from to pull someone out of that environment. Um, but in the heat of the moment, that's exactly when you need a quick fix. After the fact, so after they've calmed down, anger can be swiftly forgotten or denied, or you might find a skater lying face down on the changing room floor, refusing to speak to anyone because they're so embarrassed. It can be really awkward to address. What about doing the prep work with the skaters to address that they will get angry and talk about strategies to use, combat, stay focused, and bring the focus to the game again? Yes, that sounds like active role playing, and that's a great suggestion, and it's on my list, so we're all thinking along the right lines. When it can be really, really easy for people who've experienced an angry outburst to later dismiss it. So say it was a one-off. It's not who I am. I'm not an angry person. It won't happen again. Just dismiss it and pretend it didn't happen. They also might rationalize it, say it was right for me to be angry at that time. I lost my rag. Anyone would have been angry in that situation. So kind of appealing to kind of reason and say, well, if you were in that situation, wouldn't you be angry? Or they might even be fatalistic and say, I'm just an angry person. I have a short temper. That's just who I am. I always get angry. And that can be it's a very fixed mindset. And that can be particularly hard to break as well. When people just say, well, that's just who I am. You can't change that about me. I'm just an angry person. That's how I was born. That's my personality. None of these responses, the dismissing, the rationalizing, the being fatalistic, none of them are healthy responses. And the first important step, and it's a cliche and I'm cringing as I say it, but is to admit that there's a problem. Because when you accept that there's a problem, it's easier to address. It's the first step in change. Accepting and taking responsibility for anger is the important step to making changes to try and manage it better in future. When something happens, it happens. It's okay. We can all grow. So my first bit of advice to give your skaters, if they are angry or have had angry outbursts, and I've seen both sides of the coin. I've seen people who've been a firecracker all the time, who have an angry outburst every single game. Everyone goes, oh yeah, she's the angry one, who've actually taken a step back and become more aware of their anger and taken conscious steps to try and manage it, become much more calm and collected people. I've also seen people who everyone's like, oh, she's not bothered by anything, all of a sudden just crack and just have a really, I don't know why I'm smiling, it's awful, have a really angry outburst, really unexpected, when we all think, God, she's so chill, what's she riled up about? It might be about the smallest thing. I think the thing to remind your skaters is not to be too hard on themselves, and don't be hard on them either. Don't be punitive. Don't, it was completely unacceptable that you were angry about X, Y, and Z. You can kind of be punitive about the outcomes of the act, but actually there will be reasons that they were angry, and you need to be supportive. in how you can address that in future rather than just making them feel shit about themselves. It doesn't work. I promise you it doesn't work. I gave a talk once about encouraging positive growth behaviour in organisations, and someone said, oh, well, you've talked about the carrot, how you encourage people to engage with things. What about talking about the sticks? If you're trying to manage people by using a stick, then you're doing people management wrong, I promise. Unless it's incredibly dangerous and illegal, then yeah, being supportive and fostering growth in your skaters is a much more productive approach. Everyone gets angry from time to time. Like I said, even the calmest people will sometimes have an angry outburst, and in the heat of the moment, it's really hard to look at it objectively. But if your skaters recognise themselves as someone who does lose their temper, or they're willing to listen when you're reviewing game footage, they're willing to listen to constructive feedback about that you lost your temper here. Can we talk about why that might have been and what we could have done differently? If they lose their temper to the detriment of the game, there are things that you can do, and some of you have mentioned some of these already. And it is a cliche, but it works, I promise. Breathe is the first step to breathe, and get your skaters in the habit of having this mantra of breathing. Breathe properly. In anger, when you're in a state of heightened emotional arousal, such as being full of rage, it's a stress response. You have a lot of adrenaline running through your body, your breath shortens, your heart rate rises, your blood pressure rises, and simply controlling that, actively concentrating on measured deep breaths from the diaphragm, you can begin to recenter yourself and not trick your body, but start to reduce that adrenaline response. Even breathing, slow, even breathing will help you manage the physiological symptoms of anger, and your brain will follow, and you can start to regain that focus again. It's very similar to anxiety. My mother-in-law used to suffer from panic attacks, and she would do breathing in a paper bag, and it seemed like such a cliche, but that act of ritualizing calming down helped her. And it was quite magical to see that change in her. The next thing was something that we introduced to our bench kind of midway through this year, after we had a couple of people have angry outbursts. Our head coach suggested enforcing a calm bench environment rule. So I spoke earlier about the social impact of anger, how one person's anger can impact on the whole team. So trying to promote a calm bench environment, it's much easier to keep calm when everyone else around you is calm. If everyone else on the bench is getting obviously angry, it can be infectious. Like you get one person shouting about a ref missing a cut, and all of a sudden everyone's on the bench shouting. The people on track can't hear the bench manager's getting frustrated, and everyone's shouting and getting really wound up. If you enforce that kind of keeping calm and the fuck it bucket, the put a pin in it, or take that anger, put it in your pocket, these are all great visualization techniques to manage a calm bench environment and enforce this rule of at the bench, we're going to keep calm, we're all going to kind of sit down between jams and focus on the game. It's something we found particularly useful throughout our champ season. We made it a rule that everyone at the bench remain calm, and the discussion of penalties or anything that we didn't agree with is saved until half time or in a timeout or after the game. It's not to say that we were expected to bottle everything up and pretend it was peachy all of the time, because you get irritated about things. It happens, it's natural, and we have to accept that it's natural. But we had to reframe things and focus on the game and the jam at hand. It was occasionally frustrating, I won't deny it. I mean, it took some concerted effort, but it had real observable effects on our focus and gameplay. And our coach said from then on we played better than he's ever seen us play, simply because we were making a conscious effort to foster a calm bench environment. And people, you could see people getting angry and then remember, this is the rule, we have to stay calm on the bench. We need to, take ourselves off if we want to kind of have a shout. It takes some time to enforce and can be particularly difficult if you're down on points or you are losing a game or you think the game's going unfairly. Trust me, it's much more easy to enforce when you're 300 points up and you can give a toss about what happens because you're going to win anyway. But we managed to enforce it against a much higher opponent after champ season when we had a test game. We still managed to keep this warm bench environment because we fostered it in a kind of positive setting, and then from then on it's been much easier to enforce. The caveat is for this, if you really think that you see something that you don't agree with, such as dirty play or consistently missed penalties, talk to your bench coach or captain. This is obviously a point for skaters, but yeah, if you see things that are happening that are definitely not okay, call a timeout. Call a timeout, talk to your skaters, talk to the refs, address that. But if it's just a case of your skaters are frustrated or you are frustrated, then you have to enforce that calm bench rule and remember why you're there. Another thing to do is this reflect, reframe, and attend to in future. At Suffolk, we film nearly every game we play because we host regular game footage review nights. If things that are making a skater angry are things that they can't control, for example, how opponents play, the calls that refs make, things like that, it's important for them to recognise that those things are outside of their control. So I mentioned earlier about locus of control, and the kind of futility of getting angry about things that you can't affect. You can't control what other skaters will do, you can't control what refs will do, but you can control the way that you react. If you or your skaters choose to indulge anger, follow those instincts, follow that reactive emotion, and you don't make and it is a concerted effort. It's a concerted effort to recognise and manage anger now and in the future. That's kind of on them. It's one thing to kind of say I'm an angry person and I'm right to be angry. It's another thing to say I feel really angry, recognise that feeling, kind of own it, breathe, and say out loud if you have to. I'm angry now, but I can calm down and I need to focus. Kind of instilling these mantras of remembering what the focus of the game is, remembering what is really important. The other thing that skaters can do is talk to teammates, talk to coaches, because if there are things that they notice in you or they notice in other skaters that always makes them angry, talk to teammates and coaches about it. That's what coaches are there for, to kind of give constructive feedback. There is a way to give constructive feedback. It's about being sensitive and supportive, and it is a long and arduous process, but being sensitive to individual skaters' needs as well, knowing how they will respond to certain things, and that's about learning and getting to know skaters. Teammates may have insights as to why a skater gets particularly angry about a particular thing and recognizing what their trigger points are. They might also have an outside perspective about your actions and behaviors, and they might get angry about the same things as they do, but process it in different ways and can suggest some techniques that they use to manage it. There is a balance to be struck here, and part of it comes down to how you review anger. So there's a 2004 study by Maxwell in the journal. There's a link in the end of the slides. Found that athletes who obsessively ruminate on previous incidents of anger, so just constantly revisit angry episodes, but just revisit what happened, not think differently about it, just ruminate on what happened, they were more likely to be aggressive again in future similar scenarios. But other studies in sports psychology, also linked at the end, suggest that reflective reviewing, active role plays, visualization techniques, which we've mentioned earlier, to train positive responses to anger incidents. So I think one of the studies mentions the anger transformation exercise, where it feels awkward to do because role plays always feel awkward to do, but if it's awkward to do, it probably means that it's challenging something about yourself and it's important. Role plays can help you in a very calm and controlled environment to think, well, if this happened in future, how could I respond differently? And when you train it in training, it's easier to implement in real life. And that's why role plays exist. I do a lot of role plays for counselling, and it's awkward as hell, but damn, it makes you feel a lot more comfortable and more natural doing it in real life. Use the insight from teammates and coaches and other coaches and other skaters around you to help get some perspective, which leads me to my closing point, which is get some perspective. This was the biggest epiphany for me. The game which led me to lying face down on the floor in shame got me thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I was so unhappy after that game. I hated every moment of it. I was angry from start to finish. I did stupid shit. I played probably the worst I've played since I was, just putting in skills. I play roller derby primarily for fun, And if I spend most of my time red-faced with rage, am I really enjoying myself? I like winning. Everyone likes winning. But it isn't the end of the world if I don't. Plus, being angry all the time isn't going to improve my team's chance of success. If I now try and make a conscious effort at training to focus on improving my skills, playing my best game, and letting go when things don't go the way that I planned. And like I said with the role playing exercises, practice makes perfect. Game day is definitely more emotionally charged than training sessions, and it's I know one of the previous speakers spoke about perfecting skills in practice doesn't mean you're capable of doing them on game day, but it makes it a damn sight easier. Laying the groundwork at training, it's easier to put into practice in competitive game. Training isn't just about physical prowess, and I will bang on about this until the cows come home. Roller derby is an incredibly physical sport, but it also involves our mind and our derby brains and our emotions. We need to start blocking with the head more. Puns. Uh, Training isn't just about physical prowess. It's where you develop as a well-rounded derby skater. And that concludes this talk on anger and aggression. Um, I realised that was a lot of information in a very small space, and I'm sure you have questions besides. It's a huge subject and one I intend to continue exploring. There are a few links and resources here. Headspace is particularly interesting if you have skaters who want to use visualization techniques, who maybe need to work on centering themselves. Mindfulness can be a really good way of doing that. Headspace does offer some free sessions, but I invested in a premium account last year, and they've got specific sessions for sport, preparing for sport, and they're great, and I would recommend them. What else do we have here? This is the frequency and direction of competitive anger in contact sports. Talks a little bit about how sometimes sports people perceive anger as being energizing, but in fact it's not. And anger and rumination talks a little bit about how not skaters. None of the studies talk about skaters. There's very little published research about roller derby, aside from kind of feminist issues, which are obviously important, but not related to anger and aggression specifically. So I've looked at other contact sports like rugby and karate, even some martial sport. I wondered if anyone had any other questions. And anything else that you would like me to cover, maybe in a follow-up blog, or anything you'd like me to cover in the Facebook group, any questions that you'd like me to answer long term, because I'm happy to. Have you any tips for direct intervention? What at the time of an angry incident? When you say direct intervention, do you mean like at the time on track when someone is losing their shit? Um, it varies so much from person to person. I think if they're in danger of being violent, then get them removed from the scenario. Perhaps bench them for a couple of jams. When they've calmed down a bit, maybe talk to them about the reasons for why you bench them for a couple of jams, because they're not going to be skating in a productive way, and they will be disadvantaging all their teammates and risking further penalties, injury. Yeah, I would recommend, yeah, if someone is really losing their shit, then remove them. If they are just starting to get a bit pissed off and angry, um, we've got four bench crew now. Maybe assign someone to have a kind of guided breathing with them. It will vary from first person to person. That's why it's really difficult for me to kind of give specific advice, because it will very much depend on the person. Maybe how to talk about and work with anger after the situation. Approach them, say, sorry, a fly. Would you like some feedback? I noticed you got angry in the last game. Is this something you'd like to talk about? Because it is so difficult. Yeah, approach them in a sensitive way, be sympathetic, talk about their reasons for why they got angry, try and understand their perspective of why that angry incident happened, and offer to work with them in future in terms of offering kind of visualization, role playing, encourage engagement with breathing techniques, with mindfulness practice as well. Does that help? Does that answer your question? While you're typing, I'll answer this other one. How is aggression different to anger? It depends on what definition in the literature you look at. From my perspective, aggression is something that is more controllable. It depends on the type of aggression. This post by Troublemaker, How to Find Your Aggression for Roller Derby, is a really useful summary about not being the Incredible Hulk and being more kind of a controlled aggression and having those hard hits rather than being wildly out of control and ragey. And mainly during practice, when people, sorry, I'll finish answering this question before going to that one. How to be aggressive without being angry. How long's a piece of string? Is it okay to be aggressive? I certainly think so, as long as it is a conscious, controlled thing to do. How to be aggressive without being angry is about being conscious about when you are out of control, when you are being wound up, when your focus is being pulled. And if that happens, oh, I'm sorry, if anyone's using the Microsoft Translator, my app has just died, so you might lose that bit. I will try and rejoin it. Is anyone using it that desperately needs it, or is everyone listening in English? Otherwise, I won't worry about getting that restarted. English. Anger in skaters. So the skaters who direct anger in themselves, so they get angry at themselves during practice. I know that ties into another question that was asked earlier. Is that this same person? So I'm just. Oh yeah. Okay. So XXZ. Sorry, I don't know your real names. And mainly during practice when people get angry about themselves, and Emsel has said something similar. We have a lot of anger in skaters. How can we work with them to help them with this? They often point back, refuse to engage. If they refuse to engage, it's very difficult to break that. Maybe again, be sensitive to how you start that conversation. Highlight that you are trying to improve their ability as a skater. Maybe do some footage review with them, or as a group, and say that you're doing really well in this. It's the shit sandwich. You're doing really well in this. This is a thing that we need to work on, but you're also doing really well in this, and visualize aspirations for the future about how things could improve if they focused on particular behaviour. But yeah, refusing to engage is a really challenging thing to address. I'm afraid there are no clear-cut answers for that. As someone who's a training counsellor, it's difficult to say you need help with this in any aspect if people don't want to engage with something and don't see a problem and don't want to change. I think the first step is probably helping them to realise that things could be better if they acted in a different way, perhaps. There's typing going on, that's why I'm quiet. So excellent. There's a suggestion that Trill had some good insight into the growth mindset, encouraging people to engage, helping to visualise the outcome they want. I think that's a really good suggestion. And using goal setting as well. I think I've posted about goal setting in the past, and I can find a link to my post about goal setting, like productive, smart goal setting. if there's particular goals that people want to engage with, identifying some of the potential barriers to that, and that's when something like anger may come up as something that need addressing, and that you can then use that as kind of a wedge in to try and support them in ways that they can manage anger better. You can't change the event, but you can change your response if you want a different outcome. Absolutely, and that's what I was then talking about, reframing the situation. So there are elements about it that you can't change, but these are the things that we often rail against when we're really angry. Is the things that we can't change because you feel trapped. It's again the stress response. If you're feeling trapped or you feel threatened because there's things outside of your control, you respond in an angry way, and that's when the conscious effort and the kind of legwork prior to the event needs to go in, where people are prepared for how they might respond differently in that eventuality. So reframing that kind of after the event, but before the event, between events. So if there's an angry event, and you can identify what the things are that made you angry, then you can potentially address that differently in the future. And visualizing role playing how that might run differently. What about doing the prep work with the skaters to address that they will get angry and talk about strategies to use, combat, stay focused, and bringing the focus on the game again? So that's why we introduced the calm bench environment, because we recognised that there were certain elements that were making us angry and riled up. What were the ways that we could combat that? Was to introduce a new rule about, we don't talk about things that have pissed us off in that previous jam during the bench session. We could talk about them in half time, but whilst the game was on, we had to stay focused on the game at hand. Right. We've got 2 more minutes left. Oh, thank you. No, thank you very much. This is the first time I've ever done an online presentation of this length, and I was very nervous about it. So thank you very much. You've all been really, really attentive, and your engagement in the discussion has been really lovely. So thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll happily do it again in future. You're all very nice. Thank you. But yeah, if anyone wants to chat to me further, I'm on Twitter. It's at Astrid Coxon. I've got a Facebook page which is Dr. Astrid Coxon, and I have a blog which is astridcoxon.wordpress.com, and the Mind, Body and Roll podcast as well. We're hoping to cover anxiety in December. We're going to start recording that in hopefully next week. And if there are, I would hope to do an episode about anger in future as well. So if there are things that people want to cover, then please hit me up, send me an email, send me a tweet, send me a message. I don't mind. Anyway, you can get in contact with me. Do. I'm the only Astrid Coxon that I know of in existence. So if you Google me, you get me. Oh, I didn't do the last slide, which just says that. Look, it's got my contact details on it. Here's one I made earlier. But yeah, we're in the last minute, so I think I should probably wrap it up there. I think Hydra's probably going to give me the boot out in a sec. So, but yeah, thank you so much for being such an attentive audience, and asking such really great questions. It's given me a lot to think about as well. No, there are not enough derby podcasts out there. That's why we made one, and that's why we hope to continue making it.